Hello and welcome back to this downplayed dualistic crusade. Today I'm going to be talking about Kino Lorber's Blu-ray release of the 1932. It's usually referred to as a horror film, but it's sort of a horror action-adventure hybrid with a great dose of the charms of a classic cliffhanger serial, because it is pretty much made in the same style and based on a once famous property that was started life as a great radio series and then later became its own cliffhanger serial. I'm of course talking about 1932's Chandu the Magician, starring Bela Lugosi. Even though he's not technically the nominal star, he is the standout presence here as the villain Roxor. Chandu, of course, was based on the radio character of the same name. And when you look at this film, it is, even though it's 71 minutes, it basically, if you were to say that, or if you were to tell someone that this was the cut down feature version of a classic cliffhanger serial, as was common to do with serials after the initial release, they would probably believe you, because this does very much play like a heavily condensed version of a serial. But of course, this is just a standalone film. It is coming out in the sort of heyday and the golden era, or the sort of gold rush of the golden age of horror films. And I think the intent was to sort of play up the exotic locales of far off places and the inherent charms of having a sort of mystic character in Chandu the Magician, who is actually a very influential character, in terms of influencing a lot of other characters to come, especially the classic Marvel character of Doctor Strange draws quite liberally from Chandu the Magician in terms of being a sort of a person who has mystical abilities, not easily explained away by science. But in playing up these aspects, I think they were able to really tie into at least the sort of burgeoning horror genre that was really exploding after Universal striking gold twice with Dracula and Frankenstein in 1931, and then Paramount sealing off the big three of horror that year with their version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So you see a lot of studios trying their hand at different things to try and sort of tie in to getting at least some of that horror movie money. This is an example of sort of tiptoeing into it with a pre-established character that was very successful in another medium that was more of a sort of pulp adventure type story. But you could also play up, again, the quote-unquote exotic elements, and you could also kind of sell it as a horror film, and they doubled down here by casting Bela Lugosi as the villain. The other notable example from this year, of course, is MGM's Mask of Fu Manchu, where they got Boris Karloff to play the classic Fu Manchu character. But while that had full-on MGM opulence, it still had some flavor of a classic adventure serial, because, of course, it is based on a real archetype of Pulp Fiction storytelling. However, here with Chandu, you don't have the inherent and very unfortunate yellow peril, terrible racism that is inherent in the Sax Rohmer Fu Manchu novels, and of course is still there in MGM's film, which is of course why it was actually cut in the 1970s, long after its original release, and that stuff had to be restored. And it is very unfortunate that that's in there, and it's very jarring when you see the film if you've never seen it before, and it's still cringe-inducing like mad. But here, it's interesting that you have sort of the same approach being taken with a pre-established property that was very successful in another medium, and they've cast one of the great horror stars who had emerged the previous year. So don't come to this film looking for the best character development in the world. This is very much a pulp adventure story given life. So it's basically like if you listen to one of the classic Chandu radio episodes, but you're getting to see it in film form with all the energy of a serial. And that would be enough to recommend this film. And of course, getting to see Bela in his best days, just getting to go full tilt and there is no stopping his energy. What makes Chandu truly interesting and really remarkable is some of the personnel involved on the other side of the camera. So this film, like most serials, is actually credited to two directors. So it's credited to Marcel Vernel and William Cameron Menzies, of all people. Menzies should be a name that all film fans recognize because he is one of the most legendary of all production designers and is sometimes regarded as even perhaps being the greatest production designer in film history. But he also turned his hand to directing certain films, and almost all of them are notable for, of course, their visual style. And this film is no exception because you would think that a film very much playing out like a serial based on a radio property, there's only so much you can do visually, but Menzies throws it out the window. This film is filled with all kinds of interesting optical effects work, which is really well done and very striking for the time, particularly still being in the realm of pre-code early talkies. There's a lot of really intricate camera movement. There's, of course, I think, for me, and I think a lot of people, the most notable shot that always sticks in the mind is there's a really incredible tracking shot that goes through an ancient tomb and chamber, and the camera's literally swirling all around. And of course, when you look at it, it's obviously it's got to be a model, but it's so well done and so intricately done that it has that nice otherworldly sort of feeling. So it plays up on the eerie aspect of, again, trying to sell this as a story of the exotic. And the film is filled with all kinds of things like that. There's also a really striking, almost hallucinatory, dreamlike underwater sequence in the sort of final act climax where our hero Chandu is. They don't just try to kill him. They, of course, tie him up. They put him in a coffin. They weigh the coffin down, and then, of course, they also throw it underwater as well. So again, total Perils of Pauline, classic serial material throughout this film. But the way that sequence is shot has this wonderful sort of dreamlike hallucinatory quality to it. And the film was photographed by none other than James Wong Howe. So you have Menzies and Howe put together, and that means this film is a visual treat and is filled with all these little visual moments combined with a really intricate use of optical effects work that, for 1932, it's really unprecedented, I think. So, in terms of the story, it sort of delves and maybe it tiptoes a bit into fantasy, as a lot of pulp stories could do, and that goes hand in hand with the notion of the character. Now, for those unfamiliar, Chandu the magician is essentially a man who has trained with the yogis of the East to learn all of these ancient mystical secrets, and is thus able to go forth in the world and battle evildoers everywhere with not just the abilities of what might be considered stage magicians, but with all kinds of mystical forces, and being able to project himself onto the astral plane and being able to see things in his crystal ball and being able to manipulate what those around him see or hear or play with their senses. So a lot of stuff that you would find turn up in other characters, or things that we might associate, for example, with the radio version of The Shadow being able to cloud men's minds. This is something that the more you read of pulp fiction of the 20s and 30s, and of course that goes over into the radio realm as well. Basically, the more adventure stories that you read of the classic pulp era, the more you're going to find that there's a lot of shared commonality between a lot of these characters. But Chandu was really important for really getting more into the mystical area. And again, I think you can draw the direct parallel straight line between Chandu the magician and Doctor Strange. And even Stan Lee, of all people, admitted that the primary influence in creating Doctor Strange was indeed Chandu the magician, who of course was extraordinarily popular when he was much younger. And this stuff just starts to seep into the consciousness. And when you start to look at things, the vast majority of, in particular, the comic book realm is so heavily influenced by the pulp era that it's not even funny. And in some direct cases, you could make the plagiarism argument, but you can definitely see the direct through line from Chandu to Doctor Strange. Now, here in the film, The unfortunate part of this is while Lugosi's casting as the villain Roxor is absolutely incredible, and the entire number one reason why you need to see this film, all Lugosi fans should have already seen this film long ago. If you haven't, this is one of his great film performances, and he is the lifeblood of the film. Here, Chandu is played by the actor Edmund Lowe, and unfortunately, he makes Chandu kind of come across as much too stoic, and it's kind of harder to care about this guy because he's not very personable in a lot of ways, and that's it's fine for what it is. If you're a fan of serials, you'll know that quite a number of them, sometimes the heroes are a bit more of a stock sort of character, and the villains are going to be the much more interesting of the pair of lead characters. Well, here you kind of get that in spades. There is an interesting supporting cast. Irene Ware basically plays the sort of a damsel, but she does have a bit of has a bit of grit to her character, and she and Chandu have a bit of a back history. So it's nice to have a damsel in distress that can also sort of get into the action a little bit, and has her wits about her, which you always need in a serial heroine character. But it's unfortunate that no one else in the cast even remotely comes close to Lugosi's presence. When he first appears as Roxor, it's unfortunately kind of thrown away. He's just kind of there. But in every other scene of the film, he just strides in and commands your absolute attention, and is honestly an incredible villain presence. He still has this sense of humor about him. You really get to see Lugosi have fun with this. He's not just the scheming villain who's out for world domination, which of course he is. But when he gets to do his world domination speech, particularly in the climax of the film, Menzies does this really striking sort of dream sequence as Roxor is getting more and more feverish, and Lugosi's building up to his full intensity as he's talking about destroying entire cities and ruling all humanity. There's this really striking visual where you literally see Roxor's death ray that he has, because of course he has a death ray. I mean, what great serial villain doesn't have a death ray? But in this sort of delusion of grandeur, we see the death ray actually destroying giant swaths of entire cities, which is a really striking and actually quite haunting visual. It's one of those times where the villain isn't just monologuing; we actually get to see his delusion of grandeur, and it's moments like that. They're little. Well, they're not little, but they're exclamation points. So the visuals that Menzies and James Wong Howe were able to do, combined with all the incredible and very intricate effects work for the time period, they really highlight and strengthen the entire the entire experience, really. Because if you didn't have that, if this had just been directed by somebody else, or especially if it had been made by actual people who were cranking out serials, in terms of what most serials are going to play like, it probably would resemble much more Chandu's next appearance in a film, which was a serial and was entitled The Return of Chandu. It's not a particularly very good serial, but the reason why it's fascinating is they brought Lugosi back because they must have figured he had the name value that made the film at least marketable. But in a wonderful twist, and really the only reason why you should watch this serial, it's not very good, is they had Lugosi actually play Chandu in the serial follow-up. So if you were curious what it would be like if Lugosi actually got to play an adventure hero, well, he actually did in the Chandu serial. So that's why I think it's fascinating to go look at the serial they did afterwards. Of course, it wasn't Fox and didn't have the same beautiful visuals or even obviously the production budget, and the quality is unfortunately not very good. But again, Lugosi is the reason why you go look at the serial, because he's getting to play the adventure hero, which is such an amazingly bizarre concept with what we usually get with Lugosi's typecasting, that I think following up this film and jumping over into the serial is a fascinating sort of comparison. But again, the serial is nowhere near as good as the actual film. But I think had this been made by more of a journeyman director, and if you removed the really wonderful opticals and the very striking sort of hallucinatory dreamlike visuals at times, the film would very much feel much more like a generic serial. But there is no disguising that Lugosi's performance is the lifeblood of this film, and that performance combined with the incredibly atmospheric visuals and the incredible optical effects work for 1932, those are the reasons why you come to this film. Those are the reasons why you rewatch this film. And it's also only 71 minutes, so it moves at a really great pace. There are a number of really wonderful set pieces that you can really envision as, I mean, you could basically, again, as I said at the start, you could picture this as the sort of feature cut down version of a serial, because the set pieces are basically like the big action set piece of a serial's chapter. And a lot of them do seem directly torn out of the classic pulp adventure playbook. So if you've seen a lot of serials, if you've listened to a lot of radio plays, if you've read a lot of pulp adventures of the 30s, you're going to be right at home here. And it's just an incredible film to come back to. It's got a great sense of creativity to it. And I think that's entirely down to having William Cameron Menzies being one of the co-directors and James Wong Howe being behind the camera. And the combination of those two, I mean, alone makes this film worth seeing. But it is topped off by, I mean, quite frankly, one of Lugosi's best performances in any film he ever did. I mean, he gets to go full tilt here, but it's never over the top. It's never campy. It's never out of place. And he makes a really effective adventure villain. So much so that it's unfortunate this film didn't get a sequel. It's unfortunate that the hero is so totally overshadowed by Lugosi's performance. The ending is also wonderfully effective, and the final fate of Lugosi's Roxor is really strikingly done, very well edited, and again seems ripped right out of the classic adventure storytelling 101 handbook. So that's why it was so much fun to come back to this. I always have fun when I rewatch this film, and it's not had the greatest release history. It's been sort of painfully obscure. It's never been painstakingly restored, and it does sort of fall into that sort of gray area of it gets called a horror film, but it's not really a horror film, and it's very serial-like, so people who see it probably don't think very much of it, or they make fun of it, or things like that. So it's a film I think is ripe for reappraisal, and those who are film fans who get to see it finally, I think you can find so many great riches in it, even though it's got a very short 71-minute runtime, and it is very much and very obviously it's serial based. It's, again, the best description is it is basically like a feature cut down version of a serial, cut down to 71 minutes. But if it was shot by James Wong Howe and co-directed by William Cameron Menzies, and Lugosi's getting to go at full 200% intensity, and you just love every minute of it. Now to talk about Kino's Blu-ray, which is actually in their going out of print section, so it's a title, and also being Fox, I do highly recommend picking this up before it totally disappears. I don't know if it's sold out on their website yet, because eventually they do remove titles from their print from their going out of print sale, I should say. And it being a Fox title means that it's now under Disney, and they've sort of put all Fox titles on moratorium, and the fear is that Fox titles are going to completely disappear. So that's why I kind of panic by Fox titles, unfortunately. I think it's one of the absolute biggest crimes in cinema history if it does indeed mean that Disney basically locks away the entire Fox library, which I think should be completely... I don't know how you would do it, but that shouldn't be allowed to lock away an entire studio's cinema legacy. But that means these titles are going to be increasingly more difficult to find, and this title was not an easy film to see. They basically, for Kino's release, they are using the Fox 2008 HD restoration attempt that they did for the DVD release, which I have here, and that was done as part of their Horror Classics Volume 2. These are really nice sets that they did as part of the Cinema Classics line when Fox was trying to do spiffier DVD releases, and they just never got around to doing any of these titles on Blu-ray. So this means this is an older HD master. The film did get some restoration attempt made to it. There is a comparison on the DVD that carries over to the Blu-ray, but don't go into this expecting it to be a modern 2K or 4K scan with frame-by-frame restoration. It is not that at all. If you've seen what the DVD looks like, basically imagine that in 1080p, and that's what you're getting on the Blu-ray. This transfer is filled with specks, scratches, hairs, dirt, all the usual suspects. There is some frame wobble. There are a couple instances of some missing frames due to it being an older film from 1932 and it not having gone through an extensive frame-by-frame restoration process, because of course it is a much more obscure film with a very limited audience, unfortunately, which would change if more people were aware of it, I think. But again, don't go into this Blu-ray thinking it's going to be a full restoration over what's on the DVD, because it is the exact same HD master. So essentially what you're getting is the bump up in terms of HD quality to 1080p, of course a much higher bit rate. So there is an improvement in the overall experience, but it is Fox's same HD master. So this is merely getting that first restoration attempt that they did for the DVD out on Blu-ray. And thankfully, they do carry over the really nice extras that Fox commissioned for this set. The two horror sets they did are some of the best, I think, in the whole Cinema Classics line. The first had the John Bram films like the Lodger remake and Undying Monster and Hangover Square, which Kino has also done. All of these titles are going out of print, so I do highly recommend you pick them up because they are very, very much worth your time and very above average for the horror genre and the respective time they were made. However, this particular set included also the classic Dragonwyck that Joseph Mankiewicz did. That was really the film that defined the Vincent Price sort of image we have in our heads. So again, you can see Dragonwyck, and I would honestly recommend all horror fans, and especially all Vincent Price fans, to see it. You can get it, and I think the best version is the Indicator Blu-ray release, which has wonderful extras, and both Fox's HD Master, which was done for this DVD, and then the newer scan presentation. However, the reason why I think this box set is still important and why I would recommend it and why I've hung on to it is the inclusion of the third film, which is the very obscure and honestly really completely underrated 1942 Dr. Renault's Secret, which is quite frankly one of the single best B horror films I've ever seen, and it clocks in at an absurdly short 58 minutes. This is an incredible little B horror film. Highly recommended if you've never seen it, and I wish Kino had also done this film on Blu-ray, since they did Chandu, and now with the Fox library kind of being locked away, I think it's going to be unfortunately probably exclusive to this DVD. So since the Blu-rays are still primarily based around these masters for the first two films, and this film is still exclusive to the set, I still think it's important to have this particular set. And of course, because it's from the DVD heyday, the packaging is really nicely done. The custom artwork is really wonderful. It's got a wonderful spine, lovely rear cover. All of the titles have original artwork and extras. They're in these lovely black slim cases. But then the other thing is there's actually a really nice little booklet with the custom artwork. The printing is excellent. You know, some nice little liner notes, and you can basically tell that, you know, they put some extra effort into these releases, as was happening during the DVD era, and these are among the best put together of the Fox DVDs for sure. So basically what I'm saying is this will definitely show you the difference between the heyday of home video during the DVD era and then what we have now in the Blu-ray and UHD era. There is definitely a difference in terms of the quality of physical production being much lesser due to the industry completely changing. Now, again, on the Kino Lorber Blu-ray, it is Fox's HD master. It is exactly the same as the DVD. So essentially, you're just getting a bump up to 1080p, which does also serve to magnify a lot of the source issues. So again, you're going to see lots of specks and dirt and things, although not as much as what was in the original Element that you see in the restoration comparison. But there is quite a bit of frame wobble. There are a number of missing frames scattered throughout the feature. It's it's just going to be stuck that way, unfortunately, until somebody actually does a big overhaul restoration and perhaps find some of those. It doesn't really cause noticeable jumps or anything. There are one or two very, very minor ones where it's like, a couple frames missing here and there. But you will notice there are some missing frames and honestly a bit of one or two spots that may be a bit of flashing too. But that's all inherent to the damage that's baked into the element. So basically, if you've seen Fox's DVD before, it's going to be exactly the same, but in 1080p. Audio-wise, it's the same restored mono track. It does have quite a bit of noise and things inherent, but nothing has been overzealously cleaned up in terms of there's not. There is still natural hiss, there is some inherent distortion, but there are some occasional pops and ticks and bits of noise and things. I've never seen this film prior to the DVD edition. Everything I've seen has been Fox's HD master done for the DVD. So it is possible. I mean, I'm sure previous editions and broadcast versions have been noticeably poorer in quality due to it predating any sort of restoration attempt, and so I'm sure the audio is probably very hissy. But again, I haven't seen any version of this film that predates Fox's HD master, so this is pretty much the version I'm used to. So again, we now get an HD bump for the audio, which does help in terms of bitrate and numbers, in terms of the technical specs versus the lossy DVD audio, but it is the same mono track with the same inherent issues baked into it, which is of course understandable for this film being from 1932. Now we turn to Kino's Blu-ray and talk about the extras and packaging and things. This reuses the same art as the DVD, but interestingly, they've changed the color. So gone is the wonderful sort of greenish cast on Lugosi's face, and now it just looks a bit more naturalized. I don't know about you, but I think the DVD looks better because it makes Lugosi look so much more otherworldly, but otherwise it is the same art. The rest is in Kino's generic style in terms of their typical rear and spine. But interestingly, even though the disc label is plain, we get reversible artwork, which is quite surprising because this was not billed as one of Kino's special editions. So here we get original poster artwork for Chandu there, as he is about to be threatened by the evil of Roxor. So that's a really nice touch that was unexpected. And again, I didn't know actually was in this release until I got it and actually opened it up. So that's a nice touch. This was done at a point where Kino was sort of doing those almost seemingly kind of random. Sometimes it would be listed, sometimes it's not. And so I had no idea this had reversible artwork. So that's a nice bonus. Now, in terms of the extra features, it is carrying over all of the DVD features that were done, of course, in standard definition. It doesn't have the booklet from the box set, of course, but all of the on-disc extras are there. And this is really important because they're actually quite good, even though there's not a lot of them. So we get the restoration comparison, as I said, from the DVD, so you can actually see some of the work that Fox did. Some trailers are included, as Kino likes to do of some of their other releases. But we get the DVD featurette, Masters of Magic, The World of Chandu, where they got together a lot of the great horror historians and big names that you'll see on a lot of classic horror releases, and they talk about the film and the importance of the character and it starting as a radio sensation, and how it basically transitioned over to being a film made at Fox, and how there is a direct serial connection and how it places in Lugosi's career. And it's a nice about 15 to 20 minute featurette, again, with a lot of really great names and historians getting into the nitty gritty of things. So it's a great way to expand your experience of seeing this film. The one problem, though, is, of course, it's standard def. It was done for DVD in the 4:3 ratio. With a lot of these materials, when they get transitioned to Blu-ray and HD, the conversion isn't the greatest, and so the footage doesn't actually look super great. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a downgrade compared to the DVD. The other problem is it was apparently encoded and it's stretched to the 16:9 ratio. So not only does it look very noisy and low res, but it's also in the incorrect aspect ratio. So you have to either try and force it back to 4:3 or just watch it on the DVD because it's going to upscale to your display anyway. And quite frankly, most legacy extras still look and sound better on their original standard diff releases than they do when you see them ported over to a Blu-ray. So at least it's here, but it is unfortunate that it wasn't converted very well. And I mean, I'm used to that. I don't really mind that so much, as it's in the wrong aspect ratio, which is a bit unfortunate. But it's still watchable. You can try and force it to 4:3, but that was just something I noticed that was unfortunate. But the big thing here, and the reason that you really want to purchase this disc, this has another of Greg Mank's incredible audio commentaries. He, of course, is a Lugosi biographer. He's done many tracks on classic horror films. He is one of the great names among classic film and horror historians. And his audio commentaries are among, I think, the best ever done by anyone ever. That's not an understatement. He has a real knack for it, and every track I've ever heard of his is in my sort of best commentaries ever list. So if you're sort of on the fence about seeing this film, or you don't think it might have very much for you, or even if you're not really a fan of this film, or you only partially liked it when you may have seen it before, the entire disc is worth purchasing for Mank's commentary, just as the DVD was. He is one of the best commentators around. I think all his tracks are must-listen tracks. He is one of those names that if I see there's a commentary and he's the one who did the commentary, it's an instant purchase for me, because I know even if the film isn't that good, which this is a really good film, the commentary is worth the purchase price alone, because it's going to have so much research put into it, so much historical background, and also, as all great commentaries should have, a bit of humor and a bit of real world reading between the lines and making things much more relatable to the listener, which is something that not all commentators are able to do well. It's a very delicate balancing act, and it's a very difficult art to master, the art of making a really informative and enjoyable commentary at the same time. So this is another of his outstanding must-listen commentary tracks, and again, is worth the entire purchase price of the disc itself. It's that good of a track, and it's only 71 minutes, so it's another of the remarkable, how the heck did they make such a great commentary with so little time to talk about the film? So I'm so glad that made it over, because that is the single best extra here, and it's another of his outstanding must-listen commentary tracks. So those are my thoughts on Chandu the Magician and the Kino Lorber Blu-ray release, which again, because it's a Fox title and because it's been in their out-of-print section, I highly encourage anyone who might be remotely interested in this film, or who even enjoyed it somewhat, who when you saw it before. I must stress the importance of picking up titles like this before they are completely out of print, because they're Fox titles, and there's no telling if they're ever going to get another release, which is absolutely criminal, and again, entirely due to the Disney buyout of Fox and everything being put on moratorium and sort of locked away. So if you even are remotely interested in anything I've said in this video, please get a copy of the Kino Blu-ray release before it's gone, or if you can find it, the DVD set, because I do think, because it's the same master, you're still getting the same overall presentation and the same great extras, and you can still find it for rather cheap if the Blu-ray is now hitting higher prices. And on top of that, the box set has Dr. Renault's Secret exclusive to it, and I think that film is so good that it's worth getting the DVD set for, just for that. But in any case, it was really a surprise and wonderful that Kino did release Chandu, even if it is Fox's same master, in 1080p. This film is a real visual treat, so any sort of improvement is a real help and assist to the wonderful visuals of this film. And it was wonderful coming back to this and seeing it in HD, even though it is the same master, so it basically just looked like a slightly higher quality version of the DVD that I was used to. And of course, you can also get the lossless bump for the mono as well, which is always nice. This is an incredible film, and it's one that definitely falls through the cracks, because it gets labeled and mislabeled in terms of the genre classification. So people will come to it thinking it's a horror film and it's got Lugosi in it, and then they come away disappointed because it's not really a horror film, and it's sort of a mishmash of things. Again, the best comparison is it's basically the sort of sister film to MGM's Mask of Fu Manchu, so it makes the perfect double feature pairing. And of course, one has Karloff and one has Lugosi, so yeah, that further links them, and they were made the same exact year. So it's an interesting look at two studios making an attempt to do a sort of horror vehicle for the big horror stars based on pre-existing hit properties, and they tried to sell them like horror films, but they're not really horror films. They just have elements of what is termed the exotic, and they dabble into fantasy and mysticism and bits of science fiction, but while they might get gruesome here and there, they're not exactly quote unquote horror films, which that misclassification doesn't help their reputation for those who actually see them, because they go in thinking these are horror films and they come away grumbling that they're not horror films. So I think both films should be viewed on their own, but they make it a fascinating comparison, and they're both well worth your time. They're classics of their era and filled with so many intricate, fascinating details. But particularly here with Chandu the Magician, the real draws are the big three names I mentioned. James Wong Howe's photography, William Cameron Menzies going to wonderful lengths in his direction with his incredible visual style and sensibility. And key, this is one of Lugosi's great screen performances. He is absolutely mesmerizing as the villain. He is, I think, one of the great adventure villains of the 30s. I think has to unquestionably be Lugosi's performance as Roxor here in Chandu the Magician. He absolutely is the lifeblood of the film. Every time he's on screen, your interest is heightened, and it definitely is noticeable every time he is not on screen. So one just wishes that the rest of the cast performances, which are largely great, you just wish it was up to Lugosi's level, but that's something common you get in a lot of his performances, because he's acting and giving everything 200% every single time. That it does kind of overshadow everybody else. I don't think this may be the most notable example of that, of Lugosi's mere presence just overshadowing everyone else in every single frame. But it does make the film all the more fascinating, and that it is a must for all Bela fans. This is an incredible performance and a really remarkable film that doesn't get the credit and doesn't get the recognition that it really deserves as a truly interesting, almost one-of-a-kind film, produced right smack dab in the opening fanfare of the start of the golden age of horror films, coming right after the big three of 1931. So, again, those are my thoughts on Chandu the Magician, Kino Lorber's Blu-ray release, which I highly recommend picking up before it's totally gone and hitting crazy prices on eBay. And as always, I hope it's been at least somewhat fun and informative to hear me once again babble on about classic films, which I can't stop doing. It's how my head works. And as always, do keep supporting boutique labels and studio labels by buying films on physical media to help keep the format alive, to help keep film culture alive. And thanks ever so much for watching.